So our second speaker is Georges-Claude Guilbert, who leads the Genre and écrans project and is American Studies professor at the Université Le Havre Normandie here. He's also the head of the GRIC research unit, and he's the author of several books in English and French about gender and popular culture on Madonna, C'est pour un garçon ou pour une fille, La Dictature du genre ou Le genre des objets, and supervises many doctoral theses pertaining to gender issues and television series, notably the first one of its kind about Desperate Housewives. So today something quite different, even though maybe could be connections with Desperate Housewives. Sleep on your ruby slippers.
Thank you. I will project the proper PowerPoint in a second. My title, as you can see, is Slip on Your Ruby Slippers, Rue, AJ and the Queen, or the Slippery Slope of Mainstreaming. I was rather happy with my alliteration here, even though Brenda said it was too much, but she's not here, so. Perhaps the best thing to do is to show you the trailer first. It's short.
Tonight is my last performance. I saved up $100,000. I'm opening my own club, and it is going to be major.
Help! Help! We've been robbed. We've been robbed.
All right. Calm down, Viola Davis.
The man I was in love with took off. And the truth is, I am completely broke.
You're still a star, Robert. You get the pillar up and you do what you do best. Who's little Miss Sunshine over here?
I'm his bodyguard.
Now, how about that kid? He ended up in your RV out.
AJ's mother, she's not doing very good. I'm a drag queen on a cross-country tour, so unless you pair of fake boobs, you really don't belong in the back of my RV.
Take me to Texas. I'll tell her just wait.
Okay, go ahead. She knows me. She would never believe me. Stop. You don't know me that well. You're like a Chucky doll. Not as nice. Hello. Nobody's one thing. People are more complex than that. How do I look?
Like you need to eat something.
Because I love you. I am not ready to say goodbye. If Robert was strong enough that he'd be in need for Ruby, Ruby saved Robert.
Where's my crown at?
Match this kiddo. They can't all be Diana Ross at Belt Forum.
Who's Diana Ross?
How dare you?
Okay, sorry about the poor quality. So, as always, I have heaps of things to say, so forgive me if I speak a little bit too fast. Starting now. So, I've been working on my book on camp for more than 8 years now, as some of you know. Began in January 2012, but I will finish it someday. I have 600 pages of notes. So it's all about going back to Sontag and the definitions of camp. And, sorry, what are you supposed to do to... Yes. And so I rarely use anybody's specific definitions of camp, but I sort of move from one to another. And I very rarely use the definition that goes, it's so bad it's good, and that's camp. That's not camp for me, that's something else. So then I nearly wrote a book on RuPaul. It was actually commissioned by that American publisher, but then I changed my mind. But it doesn't mean I have not continued working on RuPaul all the time, notably in some conferences in the US. So I will get back to the notion of camp jokes, for instance, in a minute. And currently I'm working on the camp reinvention of queer country singer Orville Peck, who might not seem just like that to have many things to do with RuPaul and this show, but he does, let me tell you. So basically, you have a few indications here of the kind of thing I work on about the function of drag and the function of camp and the point of camp. But I want to move on to that famous and my favorite, definitely, quote by RuPaul that I actually use in practically all my books. We're all born naked and the rest is drag. I was always convinced of this, even as a little boy, between inverted commas. And then he actually wrote it in one of his books. So for those who don't know RuPaul, I know there are not many in this room because many of you have actually watched the whole series, and I thank you for that. He was born in 1960. He's a drag queen, actor, model, singer, writer, and television host. He became famous in the 90s, notably thanks to his amazing single, Supermodel, You Better Work, and his VH1 talk show, The RuPaul Show, and his MAC Cosmetics campaign. Since 2009, he has produced and hosted the reality competition RuPaul's Drag Race, for which he has received several Emmy Awards, plus its spin-offs RuPaul's Drag U, RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars, and RuPaul's Drag Race UK. In 2017, he was included in the Time 100 list of the most influential people in the world. As an actor, RuPaul has had small parts in movies, in and out of drag, such as Crooklyn, The Brady Bunch, To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, But I'm a Cheerleader, Hurricane Bianca, or in series such as Grace and Frankie. So, various seasons. I've only kept 3, season 1, season 9, and season 12, the current season, just to give you a few ideas, because really what I'm going to talk about is I'm not going to address the trans issue today. I've already defended RuPaul against accusations of transphobia in various American conferences. I'm just going to talk about the increasing mainstreaming of RuPaul products, beginning with RuPaul's Drag Race. So, very much so, increasing every season. But as you can see from day one, you do have a mix. Yes, it's all about gender, race, and class. And when I say it's about gender, it's as much about the construction of femininity on the runway as the construction of masculinity in the workroom. And of course, constantly notions of race, national origin, religion. And when you see black people, do not imagine that they're just African American. Sometimes they're actually African, and that sort of thing. So it's all about accents as well. There's a wonderful emphasis on linguistics. And for those of you interested in that, I recommend it. Notably the Southern accents. You could write a whole book only on the Southern accents of, and I'm sure Michael at least is convinced of that. So it's all about diversity, it's about families. In the workroom they talk about coming out, and everything that Sebastian said about that ritual, it totally works, the ritual of coming out. And of course, one of you is working on that. It works in RuPaul's Drag Race. So it is reality competition, it's a competition franchise. It is now in Chile, in Thailand, in the UK, totally globalized. And that's, of course, part of the mainstreaming, plus all over the place in social media. So definitely intersectionality and about the constructions, not only of the gender, but also race and class. Because yes, I know not everyone agrees with me, but even if race usually shows on your skin, it can be constructed in the sense that you can emphasize it or de-emphasize it. I recommend what Grace Jones used to do in the 80s with her race. And class, of course, it's totally about construction, passing as a member of a higher class and all the rest of it. So you find all this in RuPaul. And of course, sexual orientation as well, and interesting stereotypes. There's exoticism, there's spicy contestants, there's ethnic minorities, all sorts of oppression, the triple oppression of voguing, for example. I'll get back to it in a minute, which is very present here with, for example, being not only a gay black man, and that's already lots of reasons to be oppressed, but if you're a drag queen on top of it all, you're going to be rejected by everybody, even other gay black men who are not drag queens. going back to the sissiphobia that we were talking about. But it's also about the idealized female form, it's about fat bodies, it's about community, it's about belonging. And of course, the mainstreaming is particularly obvious. Oh yes, and I forgot to say, Cocorico, we have the first French drag queen on RuPaul's Drag Race this season, in season 12. And we'll see where we go with that in terms of national origin. So, the very best example of the mainstreaming of his products is that the show moved from logo TV that Sebastian talked about to VH1, and now immediately afterwards it's on Netflix, so you can hardly get more mainstream than that. So yes, you can say there is still transgression, there is still subversion, there is still a kind of in-your-face activism. There is still an extremely liberal narrative, liberal in the purely American sense of the word. There is still camp as a form of subversion. It is still a progressivist show, and the narrative is constantly about improving US society. But what happens when this translates into fiction? So, you see what he says. He says, I met with Michael Patrick King, one of the two showrunners. He asked me what the emerging audience on RuPaul's Drag Race was, and I said, well, 13-year-old suburban girls. And I confirm, I went to see Sharon Needles in Chicago, and there were all those teenage girls stepping on my toes and being generally obnoxious. So they are the ones who are now the #1 public of RuPaul. And he's the guy, incidentally, who was very much responsible for most of the good scenes in Sex and the City. Michael Patrick King, and of course, like Desperate Housewives, it is not a coincidence at all. So, hence the development, if I may say so, of the mainstreaming of the thing. What I'm trying to say here is that when it moves from a reality show about drag, to fiction about drag, it becomes even more mainstream. So, it's a road series, in the same way that you have road movies meeting all sorts of people from all sorts of ethnic groups and all sorts of classes. So even outside the main characters and the character of Ruby Red herself, played by RuPaul, we are totally talking about intersectionality throughout every single stop, notably in the South, as we discussed yesterday, as Amy and I discussed. So, Robert Lee, aka Ruby Red, who can you see here, is a New York drag queen, the victim of a con man who steals the $100,000 she was going to use to open her own drag club. You saw it in the trailer. He travels across America, performing in different clubs, but there was a stowaway in her SUV, the 10-year-old daughter of a junkie prostitute. They develop an unlikely, funny, and endearing relationship. The series is really bad as fiction. It's a really bad series. Most mainstream reviewers thrashed it, and it is true that the plot is stretched out over an entire season of 10 episodes, which maybe 2 or 3 hours would have been enough, but that's not a problem for me. I'm a huge fan, and I loved every second of it. And that's not what I'm looking at here. But I do believe that despite the show's minor flaws, the 10-episode series on Netflix has a way of charming its viewers, at least a couple of viewers in this room anyway. So, adjectives used by the reviewers: bad, sappy, cheesy, forced, disingenuous, formulaic, etc. Some of the more conservative reviewers claim it has offensive material, is questionable, but most of them say the acting is bottom-barrel Disney Channel, and a few things like that. So the few who liked it called it fun, frothy, light-hearted, picaresque. This is the show that on the outside is campy and loads of fun. It has lots of hilarious scenes, but that's a minority. So some of them question whether it was empowering or not. I do believe it is. So I agree with that, and I agree that the series has its hallmark movie moments of melodrama, but it is comedy first and foremost, and perhaps it has a few interesting messages to convey, and perhaps comedy helps it do that. So it basically rewrites Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which were road movies. So, is it radical doing a whole show, a whole series about a drag queen and a kid? Even by today's standards, I will let you think about that. But it is interesting to note that in the AJ and the Queen universe, RuPaul doesn't exist. Drag has not been mainstreamed, i.e. it's not our universe, because in our universe, drag has been mainstreamed and RuPaul exists and has changed the world. To remind you, Divine used to be the most famous drag queen in the world, but then Divine died, and then there was no super famous drag queen in the world until RuPaul came along. So there's a lot of cameos of notable RuPaul drag queens, and these people, of course, appeal to the audience of RuPaul's Drag Race. So obviously the show capitalizes on that, but it seems to have been watched by people who did not necessarily watch RuPaul's Drag Race, if only because some people do not like reality shows. So, as fiction, it is a way to sell the different messages of RuPaul's Drag Race to a bigger audience. So, is it camp or not camp? What kind of camp? Is it still subversive? And in a postmodern way, of course, RuPaul keeps saying, and he writes about it, that he appropriates pop culture. And so here what we have is the same deliberate confusion that I wrote about so much about Madonna between what I call the realitatis femina, the movement from the real life, Madonna. It's my Latin neologism. So in that case, we have the realitatis vir, RuPaul Charles, who plays a dramatis persona. So in the show, RuPaul's Drag Race is just RuPaul, but here it's Robert Lincoln Lee, and then the sort of second dramatis persona after the star persona of RuPaul, called Ruby Red, but you can see the alliterations, you can see that it's all the same R's, and that she is really recognizable behind the red wig as RuPaul. So basically the trademark is that RuPaul is always blonde and Ruby Red is always red, and I, of course, find it wonderful because I seem to like red. So it's the same type of glamazon drag that Ru built his career on. And there's the whole development here that I will have to spare you on New York and specific forms of New York drag. Of course, the allusions to David Bowie. I don't have time to develop that, unfortunately. But there is a lot of camp jokes. There's a lot of bad jokes. So in that sense, I might agree to say, even though I don't agree with the it's so bad it's good camp thing, I might agree to say that some of the jokes are so bad that they become camp because of the specific form of badness, if I dare say so, of the jokes. It's raunchy. It's this girl, the 10-year-old, is a mouthy survivor who has sometimes really should wash her mouth with soap. And at some point, she gets drunk on grapefruit juice and vodka. So you think, oh, well, at least it's not really completely for, family atmosphere in the lounge of middle-class homes in suburbia, because 10-year-old girls getting drunk. So it's definitely not PC. Maybe some find it offensive. And what's interesting is that we do have all the references to gay culture. So what they're doing is selling gay cultures, everything, not just showbiz people. You can have the list on the screen here. I can't develop. But they're selling all that to a mainstream audience. And they're also selling rewrites of Greece, and Greece, which was already a gay cult, becomes something else here with the total rewrite of Greece, but I don't have time to develop that. So to come to my third point, what's happening? There is a conversion, in the strongest sense of the word, of drag culture into a mainstream commodity, with still remaining intersectional and having the same political discourse all the time. And that's what's so extraordinary. Yes, all the gay culture is here, all the gay icons are here, but what's happening? There is a transformation. And my latest book is a book on gay icons, including all those women whose names you just saw on screen. So I can't develop the Judy Garland thing either, but even as they do that, and as every time the little girl says Dolly who or Diana Ross, who's that, Ruby Red goes, how dare you? So one of the things that it's selling to a mainstream audience is also precisely gay icons as commodity, which is basically what I make a living on. So all the vocabulary of the houses is here, the vocabulary of voguing, all the intersectional aspects of voguing, and the triple, sometimes quadruple oppressions that the practitioners of voguing are used to are there. And of course, all the lexicon is here, drag mothers, drag daughters, fishy, giving me life, reading, realness, shade, all the vocabulary is here. RuPaul and Ruby Red is immersed in a specific form of queer black culture that I would develop if I had the time, and it is actually giving us, to a mainstream audience in AJ and the Queen, that culture. So, there's also this, which I will spare you, getting the straight man, straight between inverted commas, has been interestingly done, and so that remains, I believe, subversive in a way in the message that it's conveying, even though some of you might say, well, no, on the contrary, it's completely normative because what he really wants to do is get married and live in the suburb with that man and cook and all the rest of it. So yes, you make up your own mind. I'm not going to tell you what to think. But what he says at some point is, this is about the America that we were promised. And what is this America we were promised? It's an America where you move from one city to another and you talk to people and you get on to people, and all the way going back to the melting pot, or at least the salad bowl, or what I like to call the CV dinner. But basically, my conclusion is that RuPaul is not only extremely mainstream now, but has become adoubé, je sais plus comment on dit, by Jane Fonda, and has become the new Oprah Winfrey, because the message is what, to conclude, RuPaul and Ruby help other people on the road to self-acceptance and self-love. And one of the ways they do that is by helping people to fight their inner saboteur, as RuPaul's expression goes, in the show as well. And Easy G claims that RuPaul is powerful, strong, and amazing, and also helpful to everybody on the set, and so kind. So you can be strong, notably in drag. He says, my drag is Superman to my Clark Kent. And so knowing that this inner saboteur is often intersectional, always intersectional, and is often the voice of internalized racism, internalized homophobia, internalized fatism, internalized sissiphobia, internalized lookism, and various combinations of ism, then I, for one, I'm all for it if it can help people fight those